think that ran for a season. That was him and Bill Murray golfing. That's,
It's great. And I
it,
think we're
oh,
live.
there we go.
Oh.
And now we're going.
Yeah.
Great. Hey, good morning, Justin. Good morning,
Morning.
Marianne. Thank you for
Good
joining me.
morning.
Today we're talking about something that is interesting because it seems like it doesn't die. It's a question that comes up over and over again about storage and different types of storage types. So
Mhm.
a lot of people talk cloud, but in some ways, a lot of use cases for not the cloud.
Mhm.
So we want to talk about some of the different storage options that are out there and ways that it can impact your workflows and your business. And and then I think we're going to talk about the cloud storage in a later episode, but we'll get there in a second. So first, before we dive deep into this, I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining our streams. We're getting some really great feedback from people. It's been really fun to do.
Mhm.
And if you have questions, please. Actually, we have a new link that you can join right there. You can watch them anytime you like on YouTube and our live stream playlist. And if you have questions or anything like that, we'll show up the connections right there. Thank you, Matt, for the Bitly connection. So please send your questions for us. So I wanted to say, let's just dive right in and go into what, people kick around the word RAID a lot. What's a RAID?
Yeah.
What is it?
So depending on who you ask, it stands for either redundant array of independent or redundant array of inexpensive disks.
What do you prefer, Justin?
Independent, because inexpensive is a relative term, and they
Quite
can
loaded.
get pricey.
But
Yes.
I'm a cheapskate, so inexpensive to me is
Yeah.
like, oh yeah.
It's like $2 hard drives, but not
Yeah.
the case. I got it. Me too.
No, the basic idea with it is that you take more than one hard drive and combine it together in a bunch of different ways to get something that either performs better or is more resilient or both than one hard drive.
Right. And before we dive into the different tiers of RAID, RAID is not a substitution for a backup.
No, not at all.
We have
Very,
we have to really make that clear. They're
yeah,
totally different things.
yeah.
People conflate them all the time. It's a thing we want to combat. We want to get the word out
Yeah.
there. What's
There's
what's the difference?
there's when something is redundant, you've got two copies, and in most cases, two live copies of the same thing. A backup lets you go back in time, in a sense. If you've
Gotcha.
got two things that are redundant and they're copying each other, so that if something happens to one, the other one picks up. Well, if something happens to one that isn't, it's shut down. Like if data gets deleted or corrupted or something like that, that's going to transfer to the other. And it's not a backup. It's protecting you from downtime from that hardware, not from downtime from the data itself being
Mhm.
messed with. So
Awesome. Thank you, Justin.
you're welcome.
Super important. All right.
Yeah.
So now that we've established that RAID is not backup, but RAID protects us against failures of hardware and failures of different components, let's say, it could be a software or hardware. What kind of RAIDs are out there? What do we
Yeah.
got?
So they're classified in what's called RAID levels, and it's just different types of how you break up the data. The first one is I want to talk about is called RAID 0. That is, oh, and there's our graphic.
Cool.
This is referred to as striping, and you could see if you've got two disks, disk 0, disk 1. The first block A1 is written on one drive. The second block A2 is written on the next drive, and so on. So the data is split between two drives. I like to remember RAID 0 as in you have zero protection with this. It is totally about boosting performance. With RAID
Mhm.
0, you're basically taking the performance of two drives and making it into one so that your data spread across both, so it goes arguably twice as fast, you could say, for
Right.
reading the data, writing the data. The downside is if something happens to one of those drives, one of them fails, you lose all of your data because it can't figure out which is which. So
Mhm.
it's really good
It's
as
missing those puzzle pieces, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great way to think of it. Yeah. It's great for things that are like scratch disk space, things that need to be high performance, but that if you lose, you're not gonna be sorry that you lost it. So it's good for storing like video that you're working on, and then you save your project back to another place.
Right.
But this is where it's the high speed place to work on. Or you can even do like gaming files that you put there, and you put your save game somewhere else, but you put the core files there. And minimum of 2 drives that you need for it. Obviously, you could split it across. And get boosted performance, but no protection.
Got it.
In some ways, the opposite of that is RAID 1, which is 2 drives mirrored. They have the same thing. It's often called a mirror. And this is, you'll get some boosted performance on reading because you can read data from either drive since it's the same. But writing, you lose performance because you have to write to 2 drives. The idea here is that if a drive dies, you're okay. Your data is protected because there's 2 copies of it.
Great.
And you need 2 drives, and you also only get half the space overall. So if you have 2 1 terabyte drives and you put them in a mirror, you have 1 terabyte of space. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you have to reuse them.
So it has a fairly high disk cost.
Compared to just a standard single drive, it's double the cost for the same amount of storage, but double the reliability because if a drive fails, everything continues to work.
Got it.
The next one is RAID 5, and this introduces something called parity. And the idea with parity is that, remember how in RAID 0 it was striped, so that you got that performance boost by having data across multiple disks. But if you lost a disk, you lost all your data because, as Marianne said, you had no idea what the puzzle pieces were. Parity is a way to use, in some cases, very complex math to figure out what the missing data is. So you need a minimum of 3 drives in order to get data here. But if you see here, like the A block is split between all 3 drives. A1 is on disk 0, A2 is on disk 1, and the parity information is on disk 2. So you can kind of think of it as, at least the way that I think of it in my head, and again, the math is way more complicated than this, but just to kind of visualize it, if you have, the data can either be a 0 or a 1. It's binary, it's 0 or 1. And if you've got 2 drives and then a 3rd drive, you can figure out what the missing ones are by recording, okay, if it's 0 and 0 and the parity says they're the same, if you miss one of those drives, it's a 0 and the parity says it's the same, so it must be a 0. If it's a 0 and a 1 and the parity says, well, they're different, if you lose the 0, you look at the 1, it's a 0. You look at the 1, it's a 0. You can figure out which one is missing based on that. So the benefit of RAID 5 is you get the performance boost of striping your data. You get the reliability of, if you lose a drive, you don't lose all your data, but you do get some performance hit for having to run that parity information.
Right.
And a storage hit because you need 3 drives at minimum, and essentially 1 drive worth is parity data.
Right.
So you're basically getting 2/3 of the storage space. Is that what's happening?
Correct.
Interesting. It makes me think of algebra. Like,
yes.
What x plus 3 equals this, so what's x? And it depends on where the variable x is where that parity
exactly. So if you
that's
lose
for you
a
math
drive,
nerds out there.
There's
also for the people who said, when would I ever use algebra? Right now.
There you go.
Very good Wikipedia article about RAID that goes into the math formulas that go into it, because it gets very complex.
I made it worse.
It's above my head, but I know.
To me, it makes it clearer, but I realize now that maybe I didn't make that less easy for people.
For anyone. I know. That's.
I mean, so it seems to me that a combination of some of these might be better.
So there are, the next that you'll see is sometimes called RAID 10 or RAID 1 plus 0. And this is, like Marianne said, a combination. You have 2 separate mirrored arrays. So you have total of 4 drives at minimum, and you run a stripe across them. The idea here is that if you lose a single drive, you're okay because that drive is mirrored. The
Right.
you could theoretically get away with losing 2 drives if it's in, one from each of
Each
the
arrays, the
right.
disk pools. Yeah.
And you'll be okay. But because it's there is that stripe element, if you lose 2 pieces of one of the arrays, you lose everything. So
Gotcha.
the benefit here is that you do get a combination of the reliability of it being mirrored. You get a performance boost because if it is striped. So this is very good for things like databases. The downside to it is that there is the lost disk space cost to it, because
Right.
here you've got 4 disks and 2 of them are being used as mirrors, so it's half the total amount of space that you have.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
so all of those types of RAID, the math involved, while it's complicated, is fairly simple compared to the next type. And there's a distinction between
Right.
those first ones, RAID 0, 1, 5, and 10, that can be done with what's called software RAID, where you
Right.
don't need anything fancy to do it. The Windows operating system itself can do those just by
Right.
you put a bunch of drives in and you can configure it. Uh, there's a bunch of uh, software options that do that. The next one, RAID 6, at least our preferred RAID for
Right.
servers. And the
Mhm.
idea here is that it's similar to RAID 5 in that there's data spread across the drives and parity, but there are 2 different parity
Parity
types.
disks. Right.
And this is where the math can get very complicated. But
Right.
the idea here is that you need a minimum of 4 drives, and you can lose up to 2 drives and still not lose any data. You can lose a single drive and still operate. If you have a drive failed in a system, it'll send up a warning and performance will be affected, but it's going to continue to run as if nothing is wrong.
Right.
So
Mhm.
that's why for servers, this is our go-to, because it's the perfect combination of performance and reliability.
Especially when you think about a server that may be in a remote location that might be
Yeah.
complicated to get at, or it might be time
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
so especially right now, going
Yeah,
on site
Yeah.
is a complicated process. So,
definitely. And
and
that's, yeah, the
Yeah,
the
if you can
level
keep
of
working
Mhm.
while
exactly.
we're like, if you're a Valiant customer, like we need to schedule a tech to go over there. In that amount of time, you want to still be able to work.
Correct.
Mhm.
Or
So.
And the key hardware difference between RAID 6 and the others is called a RAID controller. And the idea with that is that it's a separate piece of, there's a processor and card that's in the server that does all the math for writing out that parity information. But
right.
it also does something else that's important, because it takes time to calculate that math and write everything to the drives. It has what's called a cache in it.
Mm,
So it stores that information in that cache, has a battery to protect that cache. So when you write a file to the server, it tells the server, "Yep, that's written," and then it does the math to figure out where it's going to go into those drives.
got
So
it.
that's the hardware requirement of that. In addition,
Yeah, and we're just to say it out loud, we're barely scratching the surface here.
yeah, oh yeah,
This is a area of study of many lifetimes of how to
Mhm.
make hard drives, controllers, backplanes, hot swappable. Just touch on that real quick. Hot
Mhm,
swappable means that you can move the drive in and out of the system while it's still
mhm,
running, which is really important for systems that have that you're trying to get a very high uptime on.
mhm,
So, um, with that in mind, I think we move on to our next part, just to kind of keep things moving along
mhm.
and discuss this is different like uses of these kind of storage and how do you work with the storage. So
Yeah.
there's like internal storage and direct attached storage and NAS and SAN and all sorts of different ways. So I mean, you can spend a lot of time. Once again, another area of lifetime study.
Yep.
But if we can go through this at top level, that'd be great.
Yeah. So internal is the first, and like it name says, it's drives that are inside the server. You got a server, you got your computer, and the hard drives inside. Internal storage.
Mhm.
They tend to be the fastest of the bunch, because it's connected directly to the server, and obviously they're different. Like we're scratching the surface. There's a bunch of different ways, things
Right.
that are faster than others. But the idea with internal, it's inside the server. It's part of it. It's fastest access.
Right.
Downside to it always is that it is inside the server, so it's only as much space as in the server has.
Right.
And
It's physically limited to the chassis of
Yeah.
the server itself and the connection medium of
Mhm.
the cabling, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a very physical connection, if you think of it that way.
Yeah. The next one is still a physical connection. It's called direct attach, and you can think of it like enterprise superfast USB drives. It's
Right.
a separate chassis full of drives with a high-speed cable that connects it to the server,
Mhm.
and the server sees it as internal, even though it's outside of the chassis and has a
Right.
cable connecting it.
Right.
And
And those could be like fiber channel and SAS and a bunch of different ones
yeah,
out there.
usually those are SAS, which is a type of connector, and a special card in the server to accept it, so that it's the same kind of cable that would be inside, but
Mhm.
facing outside and runs through. I've actually seen a server that was put together that had an external array, but they didn't have an external card, so the cable went into a fan vent in the back and plugged
Oh no.
internally. And I mean, it worked.
I think I know what server you're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh no.
I have a vague recollection of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it worked because it's technically the same connection. It's not great because it's open, so it's not for
Yeah.
cooling and dust. But that's the idea, is to expand your internal array with a direct
Right.
attach.
Also, it's
Yeah.
not built for that kind of like movement and
Yeah.
kind of like in a rack or something like that. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
So
and then-
the next one is probably the most common that people are used to, and that's called a NAS. It
what
stands
does that mean?
for network attached storage.
Oh, good.
And the idea there is that it is a mini server, essentially, where you put drives in it. It's got a not running Windows or operating system like that. It's got its own lightweight operating system, and it can make file shares. So you can have shares for data to put stuff on. The one of the ones that we like, that we use a lot of, a product called Synology, you can use as a NAS. The idea is that if you are connecting directly to that device and it's just storage like that, it's a NAS. It's a network attached storage.
Right. And it scales up and down, though, right?
Yeah.
Right. And there are Windows versions of NASes, but
Yeah.
but generally speaking, you were missing some of the functionality of a full Windows server, correct?
Yeah, it's meant to just be a file share. You don't run applications on it. You don't do you'd have a separate server for permissions and security and all that stuff. It's meant to just be, here's a place where you can put files.
So, I mean, the difference between this and the previous one is that it's got a brain. It's got some sort of like actual intelligence in it. From a user perspective, they see it differently when they're logging in, right? They might see like a direct attach would be similar to just being like, oh, now I have a E drive or something. But a NAS, you could have multiple drives, you could have different shares and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep, and you'd connect to it directly over the network. And that's the other piece, is that it's connected over the network connection, not over a connection direct to a server.
Right.
There's also home NASs you can get that they look like big external hard drives with an Ethernet cable to plug in, and as you pop it down, you plug it in, and then everybody in your home network can access things on it. So they're really good for storing like photo libraries that you want to share, or music or movie libraries that you want to share.
Also, a great way to do a local backup of your workstation if you're like traveling with a laptop, that sort of thing. If you want not pay for cloud storage, that sort of thing, it might be a good way of handling it.
Yeah, definitely. And the piece there is that multiple people, multiple machines can access them at the same time because they're little mini servers.
Cool. So what's next?
The next one is sort of a reverse of that. Is called a SAN, which is a storage area network. And this one is a little more complicated. The basic idea is that it's direct attached storage over a network. So this is where you would see fiber channel come in.
Gotcha.
And the idea here is that there are exceptions, but generally one machine connects to it at a time, and they can see the actual hard drives that they're connected to, as opposed to a NAS, which makes it just a share and everybody can get to it.
Right.
This is great for again, very dense server storage where you need to have lots and lots of disks and be able to expand it, or if you're data center type where you just need lots of storage and be able to expand it out and have servers that connect to that storage at different times, or if you're building a very like scalable and redundant system where you've got multiple failover nodes and they all need to be able to look at the same disks,
Right.
this is what you would use for it.
Right.
In terms of what we deploy, we don't see it as often as much because it's the kind of workloads that it's good for also work really well in the cloud, and we can get to that.
Right.
Later too.
Exactly. And SAN was a much more popular item, especially back in years ago when you needed a large density of storage. And now, as cloud and this drive density has gone up quite a bit, changed.
Yeah, and I think
It's
really
like Azure does it better.
Right. Pretty much.
The thing that at least to me that killed the SAN for our customers is the next one is what's called a virtual hard drive.
Right.
And virtual hard drive is a file that the server sees as a hard drive. And the beauty of that is you could put that file anywhere and the server will see it as a hard drive and it'll work. So you don't need to have a super expensive SAN. You can have a NAS that's much lower cost and put a virtual hard drive on it.
Right.
And now servers can see that as if it was this block of storage.
Right.
So that's made things easier and less expensive.
Right. The virtual hard drive is, it's really just changed the game of modern virtualization, where it's just literally the entire operating system is so just encapsulated within that file, almost like an ISO image. If I just want to know that kind of use that example of a CD-ROM or DVD. I don't know if that's the right way of thinking of it, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's like when you take a disk and you copy the whole disk to your computer. You're taking an image of that disk, and a virtual hard drive is essentially a writable image of a hard drive that the server sees as a full hard drive. So it makes it very portable and makes the underlying storage that it's on, you can move it around. It could be anything as long as it's there.
All right. I think that's a great kind of primer on this information, just to kind of give us it. And so the next thing we just kind of touch on, and this may be its own episode once we get to it, because I think it's so complicated, but in this, even here, we can't just ignore it, is tier storage and offloading to the cloud.
Yeah.
So what exactly does that mean?
So really, when you think about cloud, and I know we've said this before, cloud is somebody else's computer. It's you're renting or leasing space or service or computer, something from somebody else. And in terms of storage, there's sort of a sliding scale of when it becomes more cost effective and performance effective to have your own, and when to have it in somebody else's. The pros of being in the cloud is that you can think of it as infinitely scalable, that Google and Amazon and Microsoft and whoever else you're going to use, Backblaze, will be able to add drives much better, faster than you will be able to, and can extend out your storage. The downside to it is you pay for the storage that you use. So at some point it becomes cheaper to just have it all internal and local. You also get a performance hit by going to the cloud if you're local and you put stuff in the cloud, because you're over the internet as opposed to connected directly. But and there's lots of use cases where that's a good thing, having it in the cloud, especially for things like backup and redundancy. Having it in the cloud means that it's not something you have local. And depending on the amount of storage you have, there is a point where, well, it's cheaper and better and easier to do it with cloud storage than it is to do with local. And this is definitely
its own topic.
Well, yes. But I think it's important to mention is you talked about infinitely scalable, but it also means it's easier to scale down if something like this happens. If for some reason you really don't need as much, it's something that you can take away too, and then you're not paying as much monthly.
That's true too.
With hard data, of course, you're just always going to be increasing, but there could be like things that you needed that you can go up and down, or
Yeah,
you can split the company.
Yeah, you could
Right.
split stuff out. If you archive data and don't need as much anymore,
Yep.
you can, it's on a server. If you, just like, oh, I'm going to make an archive folder, and you still have to back up the same amount of data. Whereas
Yes.
if
Yep.
you actually take it and put it somewhere else, and now
Mhm.
you can shrink your cloud storage.
Or if you, yeah, like you said, if you have an exponential growth that you weren't expecting. I mean, we always try and build out servers for growth, but sometimes people just get a nice boom, and we're like, oh, we need to add more stuff.
Yeah.
In the cloud, obviously, it's just like, okay, click, click, click.
Yeah.
Right. That's true.
Maybe not that fast.
Well, almost. It really
Yeah.
does kind of get quick once if you have it set correctly in tiering,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. So we're gonna hold off on any more conversation of this.
Sorry, yes.
This is
Yeah.
no,
It's
but
so exciting.
I think this might be our next Monday topic because we like to do
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
tech dives. So we'll do that. So with that, I'm gonna kind of just get to our next, kind of wrap it all up.
Mhm.
In terms of anything. Storage is a huge topic. It's one that always comes up in any conversation we have with clients. Anytime we discuss any kind of IT related thing, it's always storage. Where's data go? How do you protect it? And this storage is a component of that. Anything you want to add in there, JP, before we wrap it up?
There was a question that looked like it
Oh,
came in
yeah.
about storage. Does the information stored in a RAID array become lost when other components like controller or backplane are destroyed? Real quick to answer that. No, the data that's written to the drives can still be preserved in most modern RAID configurations. The RAID configuration is written to the drives themselves, so you can recover what those arrays
Right.
are. If you have an older system or not an enterprise system, it is possible that the RAID set info is missing, and you'd have to rebuild that. The only time when you do run the risk of data loss is in something where it's using that cache. If you have data written to the cache and not written to the disks, and then there's a power loss event, and it doesn't get written back to those drives, you
Right.
can lose that data. But that's why those RAID cards have a battery on them, so that they can continue to store and write that data once that happens.
Right. Excellent. All right. Well, Marion, do you have anything else you want to throw into this one, or?
No, I mean, yeah, it's very much talk to your IT professional, but
Yes.
we hope this clears a little bit of it up. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. With that, I want to say thanks, guys. This is super professional. And Matt, thanks for making those great graphics. That
Yeah,
was
thank you.
awesome.
Yeah.
We're going to definitely put those out there. I just want to say I just want to put a little promotion out here for a kind of new webinar, a slightly different format we're doing. We're doing an open for business webinar focusing on New York. We have some of our great trusted advisors who are going to join us. It's myself, Josh Berger, Mike Gansel, Lion Klein, and Frank Morano, all people that Valiant works with in different formats as accountants, legal, business consulting, and real estate. So our goal here is to kind of get answers and questions and just discuss what's going to happen as we start getting back to work, back in the office, and what the new normal kind of looks like. And so that's please join us next on Thursday this week at 1 p.m. Sign up. The registration's right there, thevaliantway.com, open for business. And love to see everyone join in for that. And with that, we're gonna have a really exciting one Wednesday. And Marianne's running. It's really right in her wheelhouse. It's the Office 365 tips and tricks. So if there's anything, tips and tricks you're not sure about, things you want to know, we'd love to have them there. Please submit them to our website. I'm really excited to see that one come out. I think it's going to be great.
And join us, and anything that that's a good tip or trick.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
I have people all the time. I mean, people still teach me things, but a lot of times it'll be something that I think everyone knows, and they're like, "Wait, what? I can set up rules?" And then it's a whole new ball game. But yeah, we're gonna keep it pretty narrow. I mean, I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but we're just gonna do a little bit of how the different things interact. Anyway.
Right.
Office 365 tips and tricks. It's going to be fun.
Very cool. Very cool. And very good. So with that, I want to say thank you guys both for joining me today. I love doing this in the morning. It's super fun. And just please take a look at us at thevaliantway.com if you have any suggestions, anything like that. And looking forward to Wednesday. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye now.
Bye-bye.